A storm is brewing in the political landscape, friendships that seemed unbreakable are cracking, and alliances forged over years are teetering on the brink of collapse. Since President Trump's second term, the once strong ties binding the United States to its historical partners have undergone unprecedented strain. The most striking example is the sharp deterioration in relations with Canada, triggered by a provocative proposal to include its northern neighbor as the 51st state. What was initially perceived as an inflammatory joke quickly escalated into a full-blown diplomatic standoff, spawning mutual tariffs, consumer boycotts, and public squabbling, undermining the once stable relationship between the neighboring nations. Another rift has opened between the United States and the European Union, two powers historically united as close allies. From the outset of his new mandate, Trump has accused the EU of exploiting the United States through unfair trade deals and one-sided defense packages. He has asserted that Americans are footing the bill for Europe's security without adequate contributions from member states, fostering a perception of inequality and abuse. The bellicose rhetoric quickly permeated the political sphere, causing a noticeable divide in Washington's and Brussels' approaches to addressing global problems. This divergence is particularly evident in their increasingly differing strategies toward Ukraine. Once united in supporting Kyiv in the face of Russian aggression, both sides now appear to be charting different paths, undermining the unity that was once a cornerstone of the transatlantic alliance. Tensions reached a boiling point when the Trump administration imposed a 20% tariff on imports from the EU, framing it as a corrective measure against perceived unfair trade barriers. This measure further complicated relations. In response, the EU is developing more extensive countermeasures. Rather than limiting itself to traditional tariff responses, Brussels is targeting the sphere where America has comparatively less leverage, its dominant tech giants. Europe represents a vast market for companies like Google, Apple, Amazon, and Meta, giving the EU considerable influence. The European Union has chosen a unique strategy of pressuring American tech corporations, whose revenues from European customers reach billions. Regulatory or fiscal measures introduced in Europe could seriously disrupt these companies' global operations. Unlike the situation in the United States, where European tech giants do not wield comparable influence, the EU is targeting the Achilles heel of the American economy while avoiding the risk of retaliation. The EU's strategy involves moving away from traditional trade sanctions to a more precise and effective approach. In response to aggressive tariff maneuvers by the U.S., French Finance Minister Eric Lombard proposed increasing oversight of American tech giants through stricter data handling rules. This approach allows the EU to leverage its economic power without provoking a full-scale trade war while maintaining the possibility for negotiations and protecting its own interests. A key element of the strategy is limiting how American tech firms process European data, creating significant regulatory barriers and potentially affecting their business models. France views the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, as an effective tool capable of not only ensuring compliance with the strictest standards in the collection and processing of information, but also influencing corporate policy worldwide. Moreover, the Data Act being developed in the European Union could require leading American corporations such as Google, Amazon, and Microsoft to share their data sets with European competitors, as well as introduce restrictions on the cross-border transfer of industrial data. Such requirements would undoubtedly entail increased compliance costs and may require a review of data governance structures in these companies. In addition to regulatory pressure, France is actively promoting the idea of introducing a tax on digital services, which would target the largest American tech giants, known by the acronym GAFAM: Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft. Germany and other EU member states are likely to support this initiative, viewing it as part of a broader strategy to achieve economic reciprocity. The European Union is considering introducing a digital tax that will affect key areas dominated by American companies, such as app stores, cloud platforms, and mobile services. This step aims to restore balance in transatlantic trade and ensure fair competition in the EU's digital economy. In addition to digital levies, the EU is exploring other targeted measures. Specifically, there is discussion of tightening environmental standards or introducing selective industrial restrictions instead of applying general tariffs. This approach would allow Brussels to target sectors where the U.S. has a significant surplus, such as technology and services, maximizing the impact and minimizing negative consequences for European industry. EU representatives emphasized that any retaliatory measures must be proportionate and reversible, aimed at stimulating dialogue rather than deepening divisions. As part of this strategy, Brussels may deploy anti-coercion instruments such as restricting access for American companies to European public procurement or limiting intellectual property rights within the EU. The European Union is clearly aiming to become a trendsetter in regulatory matters, particularly in the digital sphere and data processing policies. A legitimate question arises: what exorbitant profits do tech giants extract from the European market? To shed light on this question, it is worth turning to specific figures. The four pillars of the American tech industry, Meta, Google, Apple, and Amazon, heavily rely on the European market, which brings them a significant share of revenue. For example, Meta Platforms, which owns popular platforms such as Facebook and Instagram, generated $38.36 billion from Europe in the 2024 fiscal year. This impressive sum accounts for approximately 23.32% of the company's global revenue. Notably, in 2023, this figure was $31.21 billion, indicating an impressive year-on-year growth exceeding 20%. Although the European market's share of Meta's total revenue has slightly decreased from 25% in 2017, the region remains the company's second-largest market after North America. These successes appear especially impressive against the backdrop of the tightening regulatory environment in Europe and looming fines under the Digital Markets Act. 2024 marked a significant year for Google, with the corporation's revenues in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa triumphantly surpassing the $100 billion mark for the first time. Search advertising continues to provide the lion's share of this impressive sum, remaining the cornerstone of Google's global advertising sales. However, YouTube advertising also makes a significant contribution, strengthening the company's position in the region. This financial surge serves as a compelling testament to Google's deep penetration into the daily lives and commercial activities of the countries of the European Union. Apple is not far behind, triumphantly solidifying its position in the European market. In the 2024 fiscal year, the company reported regional revenue of $11.3 billion, surpassing the previous year's figures $94.2 billion. Approximately 26% of Apple's total sales come from Europe, making this region one of the company's key markets outside the American continent. Even more impressive is Apple's operating profit in Europe, which reached $42 billion in 2024, marking a sharp increase compared to $36 billion in 2023. These figures eloquently demonstrate the continued demand for iPhones, MacBooks, iCloud cloud services, and the Apple Music platform among European consumers. In Amazon's financial reports, the European market is not highlighted separately but is included in the vast international segment. However, the overall figures speak for themselves. In the fourth quarter of 2024, the corporation's international sales reached an impressive $43.4 billion, a 9% increase over the previous year. Although Amazon does not publish specific data for Europe, these figures suggest that the European region plays a key role in the company's global growth. This is evidenced by large-scale investments in the construction of warehouse complexes and the expansion of the Prime service, covering almost the entire continent. All this indicates that Amazon's presence in Europe will only strengthen and expand. Taken together, these financial flows clearly demonstrate the important place that Europe occupies in the business models of American tech giants. The European Union not only provides them with a vast and solvent customer base but also sets the tone in the global regulatory landscape. As Europe actively promotes the concept of digital sovereignty and tightens antitrust legislation, American companies have to adapt to the new conditions. Nevertheless, the significant revenues they generate in Europe make leaving this market highly unlikely. Currently, European politicians and corporate leaders are engaged in active dialogue, which should determine the future of relations between Silicon Valley and Brussels. The outcome of these negotiations will have a significant impact on the further development of the digital economy in both Europe and the world. The European Union, acting simultaneously as a key economic partner and a strict regulator, exerts a dual influence on American technology companies. Despite political barriers and regulatory restrictions, giants like Meta, Google, Apple, and Amazon continue to demonstrate revenue growth, confirming that the European market remains strategically important and indispensable to them. Looking at transatlantic trade in more detail, it is worth noting the colossal scale of economic interaction between the EU and the US. Bilateral trade relations between them are the largest in the world, reaching €1.66 trillion in 2023. This amount includes €851 billion in goods and €746 billion in services, the result of years of mutual investment and efforts to harmonize regulatory standards. In the goods trade segment, the European Union exported €503 billion worth of products to the US, which accounts for about 20.6% of the total volume of goods exports from the EU. Imports from the US amounted to €347 billion, resulting in a significant surplus of €157 billion in favor of the European side. These figures clearly demonstrate the deep interdependence and economic benefits that both sides derive from the transatlantic partnership. The structure of exports is dominated by machinery and transport equipment, which account for 39% of supplies, followed by chemical products, 32%, and other industrial goods accounting for 20%. In the service sector, a different picture emerges, the European Union purchasing services from the US in the amount of €427 billion provides reciprocal services of only €319 billion, forming a deficit of €109 billion. Investment ties between the two economies are even more extensive. Mutual foreign direct investment reaches a colossal amount of €5.3 trillion, providing millions of jobs in both Europe and America. Tensions escalated on April 2, 2025, when the Trump administration imposed a 20% tariff on European products. This move was motivated by the assertion of a 39% effective barrier allegedly established by the EU for American goods. European officials and economists immediately challenged this claim. According to the European Commission, the average EU tariff on imports from the US is about 1%, while the WTO cites a figure of 4.8%. In addition, in 2023, the US collected $7 billion in duties on imports from the EU, more than double the $3 billion collected by the EU on American goods. Against the backdrop of a rapidly accelerating political pendulum, the 39% figure associated with Trump's name became a catalyst for rethinking relations between Europe and America. In response, the European Union is developing a complex, multi-layered strategy designed to protect its own interests while avoiding chaotic escalation. A central element of this strategy is a package of targeted tariffs worth €26 billion aimed against American goods. The steel industry, agriculture, and mechanical engineering are under scrutiny. These measures are expected to take effect by mid-April, sending a tangible signal to Washington. Brussels is considering targeting sectors of particular importance in Republican states, using economic influence as leverage on U.S. domestic policy. This approach demonstrates the EU's desire for a strategic game in which economic instruments are used to achieve political goals. In addition to tariff measures, the EU has regulatory and fiscal instruments at its disposal aimed against the largest technology companies. Increased monitoring of compliance with the General Data Protection Regulation (GDPR), new restrictions under the EU Data Act, and a possible expansion of digital service fees could seriously affect the activities of Google, Amazon, and Meta, whose European revenues account for a significant share of their global revenues. Finally, the EU is ready to apply its anti-coercion instrument, which could deny American firms access to lucrative government procurement contracts, financial markets, and intellectual property rights within the bloc. This instrument is a powerful deterrent, demonstrating the EU's determination to protect its interests in the face of growing geopolitical tensions. So, what is the anti-coercion mechanism? In March 2023, the European Union implemented the Anti-Coercion Instrument (ACI), designed to counter attempts by third countries to exert economic pressure. This addresses situations where, for example, discriminatory procurement rules are introduced or subsidy programs are used to force EU companies to accept unfavorable conditions or face exclusion from the market. This new mechanism fills a gap that previously existed, as the former blocking regulation was primarily aimed at extraterritorial sanctions. Now, the ACI allows the European Union to respond promptly and adequately to a broader range of coercive measures. How does this work in practice? If an EU member state or a company facing coercion raises an alarm, the European Commission initiates an investigation to establish the facts. If coercion is confirmed, the Commission formulates a package of countermeasures and submits it to the Council of the EU for consideration, which can approve it by a qualified majority. Once adopted, these measures will be implemented through delegated acts, allowing them to take effect within weeks. The toolkit to be used is quite diverse, ranging from restricting exports of strategically important goods covering a wide range of products from advanced equipment for the semiconductor industry to key mineral resources and dual-use technologies, to suspending preferential tariff quotas, access to public procurement, and even scrutinizing or forcing the sale of investments by companies from countries engaging in coercion. In practice, this could mean that if negotiations with the United States on mutual access to subsidies under the CHIPS Act or public procurement rules fail, the ACI could be used to restrict exports of technologies and materials critical to EU interests and excluded from U.S. programs. Although this instrument has not yet been activated, its very existence strengthens the EU's negotiating position. When it is launched, it will ensure a close link between any export restrictions and the initial coercive measures and the possibility of their removal once a mutually acceptable agreement is reached between the parties. The economic winds of change are already noticeably stirring the sails of global trade. According to the European Central Bank, in the event of an escalation of tariff wars, the Eurozone's economic growth risks losing 0.3 to 0.5 percentage points. Analysts at Frontier Economics are raising the alarm, predicting a reduction in export deliveries from EU countries by approximately $29 billion if 20% tariffs are introduced. In turn, American consumers may feel the effects of a 25% tariff on imports from Europe, which threatens to reduce overall welfare by about 1.5% and significantly reduce trade volumes. The vulnerability of individual sectors of the economy is becoming increasingly apparent. For example, about 21% of European vehicle exports go to the United States, while 15% of American cars are sent in the opposite direction. It is noteworthy that American pickups are already subject to a 25% duty in the EU, which is significantly higher than the 10% rate for European cars imported into the United States. We should also not forget the possible tightening of data regulation, which could lead to increased compliance costs for American technology giants, which, in turn, could negatively affect their profits and investment activity in Europe. The transatlantic dispute, in addition to the obvious economic consequences, carries a tangible geopolitical charge. Financial markets on both sides of the Atlantic are showing increased volatility, reflecting investor concerns about the prospect of stagflation caused by trade disputes. Some experts express concern that American tariffs, contrary to expectations, could play into the hands of Chinese exporters, redirecting trade flows and increasing competition for European manufacturers. In these circumstances, Europe faces the difficult task of maintaining a balance between economic ties and strategic independence in relations with both Washington and Beijing. Despite existing disagreements, Brussels declares its desire for a balanced agreement that takes into account mutual interests and avoids a protracted economic confrontation. At the same time, European officials emphasize their readiness for retaliatory measures if negotiations stall. According to the most pessimistic forecasts, an escalation of mutual tariffs could result in losses of $1.4 trillion for the global economy. In an era marked by escalating geopolitical turbulence and an increasingly urgent pursuit of technological independence, the European Union is taking decisive steps to reduce its reliance on technologies developed in the United States. A key element of this strategy is the launch of the Invest AI program, unveiled at the Paris AI Summit in 2025. This initiative involves mobilizing a massive €200 billion aimed at strengthening Europe's position in the field of artificial intelligence. These large-scale investments cover a wide range of areas, including funding for AI research, developing the necessary infrastructure, and training skilled personnel. Particular attention is being paid to the creation of 4 giant AI factories, for which €20 billion has been allocated. These enterprises will specialize in training advanced AI models, utilizing the most modern computing power. The Invest AI initiative has received strong support from both public and private entities. A coalition of over 60 European companies has committed to investing €150 billion in AI-related projects. In turn, France has announced an additional investment plan of €109 billion aimed at modernizing infrastructure and expanding the country's AI capabilities. Alongside this, European countries are developing their own strategies. For example, Italy has established the Artificial Intelligence for Industry Institute AI4I in Turin. Its mission is to integrate AI into various industries, and it is one of the main recipients of Invest AI funds. However, despite the significant financial investments, the European Union faces difficulties in keeping pace with the rate of AI development in the United States and China. Experts note that the historically low level of private investment in European AI and the need for coordinated efforts are hindering innovation and commercialization of technologies. Nevertheless, the EU's comprehensive approach, combining large-scale funding, regulatory frameworks, and international cooperation, demonstrates a firm intention to secure a worthy place in the global AI market. At the same time, tensions between the EU and the US are already making themselves felt. European consumers have begun boycotting Tesla products. The European market is becoming increasingly problematic for Tesla as sales volumes fall and a wave of boycotts strengthens. The origins of this rejection lie in the political views of Elon Musk, whose stance on a number of issues is in stark contrast to the values traditionally espoused in Europe. His open sympathy for right-wing parties, especially the German Alternative for Germany (AfD), has sparked a wave of criticism and rejection. Musk's appearance at an event organized by the AfD and statements that suggest a need for Germany to rethink its historical past have been particularly painful for European society. Furthermore, Musk's actions during President Trump's inauguration, which many perceived as a gesture related to a Nazi salute, further inflamed the situation. All of this has inevitably affected business. European Tesla sales are showing a steady decline. In Germany, the company's second-largest market, sales fell by 76% in February 2025 compared to the same period last year. A significant drop in demand for Tesla electric vehicles has been noted in several European countries. France saw a 63.4% drop in sales, Spain reached 75.4%, Sweden 46%, and the Netherlands 42.5%. Notably, the pan-European electric vehicle market is growing, suggesting that Tesla's failures are due not so much to general trends as to a specific consumer reaction to the company's policies and its leadership. Negative attitudes towards the Tesla brand are not only reflected in falling sales. There have been cases of vandalism at Tesla dealerships in Berlin and Stockholm. Some owners of electric vehicles of this brand publicly expressed disappointment with their choice, placing stickers on their cars with confessions of regret or shame. The rejection of Tesla is also spreading in the corporate environment. For example, the German pharmacy chain Rossmann and the green energy supplier Lichtblick have abandoned the use of Tesla cars in their fleets, citing that Elon Musk's public image contradicts their corporate values. All of this combined has a negative impact on Tesla's position in the global electric vehicle market. A curious picture is unfolding in the European market. The position of one company is weakening, while another, especially the Chinese giant BYD, is showing impressive growth. BYD's recent sales leadership, surpassing even Tesla, indicates a major reshuffling of forces in the electric vehicle segment. Experts fear that Tesla's difficulties in Europe may only be a harbinger of larger problems if public opinion continues to be shaped by Elon Musk's political connections. The brand, once synonymous with innovation and a forward-looking vision, is now experiencing a reputational crisis that could undermine its long-term prospects in one of the world's most environmentally conscious and politically active markets. But that's not all. A tariff war initiated by Trump against long-standing allies poses significant risks and far-reaching consequences. Economically, rising consumer spending, inflationary pressures, and trade barriers could slow economic development and create additional burdens for households on both sides of the Atlantic. Politically and strategically, the consequences could lead to a reshaping of global alliances. According to some reports, organizations such as NATO are considering structural changes to cope with deepening divisions. Geopolitical tensions are escalating as trust between nations erodes, leading to the disintegration of military-political alliances and hindering international cooperation. Paradoxically, the actions of the Trump administration have pushed a number of countries to strengthen their own economic sovereignty. In particular, Canada and the countries of the European Union have embarked on a course to reduce their dependence on American markets and supply chains. This strategy is expected to allow them to increase their own industrial potential and strengthen their competitiveness in the long term. Ottawa, for example, is pursuing a policy of diversifying its foreign economic relations, seeking to strengthen ties with countries located outside its southern neighbor. Deepening trade ties with the European Union have led to a 65% increase in mutual trade since 2017. The partnership in the supply of raw materials, concluded in 2021, is also aimed at diversifying export flows and reducing dependence on the American market. At the same time, the Canadian government is taking measures to return production facilities to the country and is actively investing in the development of advanced technologies such as robotics and artificial intelligence. These steps are aimed at stimulating economic growth in various sectors, from clean energy to healthcare, and ultimately contribute to strengthening the country's economic sovereignty. Finally, Ottawa is working to improve the resilience of supply chains, working closely with domestic manufacturers and modernizing infrastructure. This will allow the Canadian economy to better withstand global shocks and political pressure from abroad. In an era of increasing geopolitical turbulence and persistent vulnerabilities in supply chains, the European Union is taking active steps to ensure access to key raw materials. Establishing partnerships with resource-rich countries, such as Canada, is becoming a strategic priority. In parallel, the EU seeks to stimulate reindustrialization within its own territory, emphasizing long-term industrial investments rather than short-term gains. While Western alliances are experiencing strain, global dynamics continue to shift. Some states are showing cautious interest in developing new ties in the East, including with China, which has long been perceived as a rival. This trend reflects a major reassessment of strategic priorities in the face of profound uncertainty. The consequences of the tariff wars initiated by the Trump administration are still being felt. Whether this will lead to a reshaping of alliances, a revival of domestic industry, or prolonged volatility remains an open question. The coming years will be decisive in determining the future course of events. Following these significant decisions, the world stands on the cusp of a new international order. What it will look like remains to be seen, but it is already possible to make assumptions and share your vision of the future. Feel free to express your thoughts and predictions about the future global order in the comments. Your opinion is important and can become part of a broad discussion about the future of the planet. On that note, we conclude our broadcast. Thank you to everyone who was with us today. If you found this content interesting or useful, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with the latest news and analysis. Your support helps us grow and create even more interesting content. On the screen, you can see a recommended video from our channel that may interest you. Enjoy watching.